presence, delighting in my sustenance, exulting and rejoicing in what I grant them from my generosity and mercy, bestowing on them the abundance of my reward and provisions." End of quote. At-Tabari next relates several reports which detail the pleasures awaiting the souls of the martyrs. He cites a hadith from Ibn Abbas in which the Prophet relates that those who had been slain at Uhud would be transformed into souls residing in green birds who would frequent the rivers of paradise, eat of its fruits, and alight on golden candelabra in the shadow of the divine throne. When these martyrs wished out loud that they could inform their brethren on earth about their blissful state, God caused these verses to come down. As we recall, Muqatil had cited a similar report in exegesis of this verse, but without attribution. In other words, he had not mentioned Ibn Abbas as the source for his report. A report almost identical to Muqatil's, which additionally refers to God's querying of the martyrs 3 times if they required anything more, is also quoted by At-Tabari on the authority of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. A variant report which points to the paranetic purpose of some of these exegetical reports is worthy of note. This report emanates from Ibn Ishaq, who related, and I quote, God told his prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, that the verse, "Do not consider those who are slain in the path of God to be dead, rather they are alive and provided for in the presence of God," would induce the believers to seek the rewards of paradise and mitigate the enormity of fighting. End of quote. Next, Az-Zamakhshari cites the following statement from Al-Hasan al-Basri in reference to Qur'an 2:154. "Indeed, the martyrs are alive in the presence of God, their provisions laid out before their souls. Thus, they are engulfed by happiness and bliss, just as fire is laid out before the souls of the Pharaoh's people morning and night, and they're engulfed by pain." Az-Zamakhshari cites Mujahid's exegesis, as also given by At-Tabari, and further refers to unnamed scholars who were of the opinion that perhaps the verse means that God assembles the severed parts of the martyr's body and revives them and confers upon them his bounties. Others were of the opinion that the verse was specifically revealed concerning the martyrs of Badr, who were 14 in number. As for Qur'an 3:169, Az-Zamakhshari states that the essence of the verse is that those who are slain in the path of God are alive and eat and drink like normal, live human beings, which serves to underscore the exceptionally blissful experience they are granted by God. Fakhruddin Ar-Razi has a lengthy exposition on Qur'an 2:154. You gotta be kidding me, are you serious? I started at 12. I'm serious, I should be able to do it till 5. Unless you're counting the minutes a little differently. Okay. Fakhruddin Ar-Razi has a lengthy exposition in Qur'an 2:154, signaling the theological significance of this particular subject by his time. He begins by pointing out that this verse has its parallel in Qur'an 3:169, and that Qur'an 2:154 must be read in the context of the verse preceding it, which states, "O those who believe, believe and implore the help of God with patience and prayer, for God is with the patiently forbearing." Thus, Ar-Razi says, God adjures believers to seek his help with patience and prayer, and now I quote again, "in establishing my religion, and if you are required in this endeavor to struggle against my enemies with your wealth and your bodies, then you should do so and incline yourselves to do that. But do not think that yourselves will thereby perish, rather know that your slain are alive in my presence." End of quote. I'm going to skip over a little bit. Ar-Razi next launches into an extensive discussion of what the possible implications of this verse are for understanding the state of the martyrs after physical death. To summarize, he says that the majority of the commentators are in agreement that those who are obedient to God attain their reward in their graves, even though their bodies are lifeless. He refers to Al-Assam, who had said that this verse contains a rejoinder to, and I quote, "the polytheists who do not know that the one who is killed for the faith of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is alive in the faith and guided by his Lord." Ar-Razi then goes on to rehearse some of the debates already familiar to us by now concerning whether a special status reserved only for the martyrs is indicated here, and whether they enjoy their reward physically in heaven or spiritually in their graves. Ar-Razi believes that the verse does indicate a special status for the martyrs, although their status is lower than that of the prophets and the truthful ones, an-nabiyyin wa siddiqeen, in reference to Qur'an 469. He also inclines towards the view that the martyrs enjoy the reward spiritually, for no one will be physically resurrected until the day of judgment, and the disembodied soul is capable of experiencing pain and pleasure, he says. With regard to Qur'an 3:169, Ar-Razi says that the verse was revealed to counter the assumption that jihad leads to being killed, as was said about those who left for the battle of Uhud. And of course, being killed is something undesirable, makruh, and to be avoided. Being killed, however, continues Ar-Razi, is determined by God as is natural death. There's no avoiding either when ordained by God. But the verse provides another cogent response to allay such anxieties, that being slain in the path of God is not something undesirable. How can it be undesirable when the slain individual is alive with God after his death and is destined for an honorable status and closeness to God? He's furthermore given all kinds of provisions and basks in pure bliss and joy. This verse, continues Ar-Razi, was specifically revealed concerning those slain at Badr and at Uhud, and to reprimand the hypocrites who had desisted from taking part in the fighting on account of their fear of being killed. Let me now go on to Al-Qurtubi. Again, I'm kind of jumping over a little bit. The 7th, 13th century exegete Al-Qurtubi defers the full treatment of martyrs and the laws pertaining to them until his exegesis of the related verse, Qur'an 3:169, which I will discuss shortly. He comments very briefly on Qur'an 2:154 as follows. He says that it is possible to aver that if God revives the martyrs after their death to confer his bounties on them, then he can also revive the unbelievers to punish them, and there is proof for that in the torments of the grave. When one says the martyrs are alive, it does not mean that they will awaken, sayahyun, from death, for that is true of everyone. Rather, it refers to some different state, as indicated by his saying, but you are not aware, and means that the martyrs are dead and alive at the same time, a state that cannot be compared to any other. With regard to Qur'an 3:169, Al-Qurtubi says that the verse concerns the martyrs of Uhud, although others said that it referred to Bir Ma'una. God intended Uhud to serve as a test to distinguish the hypocrite from the sincere believer, al-munafiq min as-sadiq, and that whoever was slain fighting was assured of a noble status and life in his presence. Here, Al-Qurtubi cites the hadith from Ibn Abbas, which describes the souls of the martyrs at Uhud taking the form of green birds and enjoying the pleasures of heaven. He also cites another hadith from Jabir, in which the Prophet assures him that his father, who had suffered martyrdom, ustushhida, had been granted a special audience with God. Like Ar-Razi, Al-Qurtubi ponders the meaning of being alive after having been killed, citing many of the same authorities as the former. Interestingly, Al-Qurtubi includes the martyrs with prophets, scholars, callers to prayer, market inspectors, muhtasibin, and Qur'an reciters, hamalatul Qur'an, whose bodies are not consumed by earth. Additionally, he lists the various funerary practices, bathing the body, the manner of praying over the deceased, etc., that developed on account of the special status accorded to the martyr, and the differences of opinion regarding these practices among the legal scholars such as Malik, Ash-Shafi'i, Abu Hanifa, and Sufyan al-Thawri, citing variant hadiths to document different positions. Al-Qurtubi next lists several hadiths and reports in this section, some of which were not listed by the other exegetes we previously looked at. He lists a hadith, for example, which declares that a martyr's debt, unlike his other sins and shortcomings, will not be erased Another hadith, not directly pertaining to a martyr, warns that righteous deeds alone will not save the believer from the fire if he or she has also slandered or cursed a person, spilled blood, or engaged in backbiting. As for the rizq the martyrs will enjoy in the hereafter, it includes closeness to God, a noble status before Him, and the opportunity to engage in seemly praise of Him, says Al-Qurtubi. Very quickly now to a summary and analysis of these various exegeses to wrap up. A comparison of early and later exegesis of Qur'an 2:154 and 3:169 is revealing of how a cult of military martyrdom progressively came to be articulated and read back into these verses, despite the lack of overt reference in these verses to firstly the military martyr, and secondly to any assumption of their higher status vis-a-vis other believers who die, for example, while emigrating in the path of God. And here I'm thinking of Qur'an 22:58, which states, those who emigrated in the path of God and then were slain or died, ثُمَّ قُتِلُوا أَوْ مَاتُوا, God will provide handsome provisions for them. This verse makes no distinction between the pious individual, in this case the pious emigrant, who is slain, and one who dies naturally. As noted, Muqatil understands both Qur'an 2:154 and 3:169 to refer to those slain in the Battle of Badr. Abdur Razzaq makes no reference to a specific battle in relation to these verses, while from the time of At-Tabari onward, Qur'an 369 is linked to Uhud, 169 I should say. We note also that by the time we get to At-Tabari, a full-fledged doctrine appears to have emerged regarding the exceptional rewards and status conferred upon the fighter in the path of God, al-mujahid fi sabilillah in general, whether he's slain or victorious and dies later of natural causes. Most valuably, At-Tabari records the objections raised by some in assigning such an exalted status, specifically to the military martyrs, when the Quranic verses themselves make no such reference to it. Furthermore, some had pointed out that all human beings, believers and unbelievers, are alive in barzakh, awaiting final resurrection. How can the slain martyr be assigned to a different state? And At-Tabari responds to these objections by invoking the authority of certain companion reports which detail the posthumous pleasures reserved for the martyrs exclusively as an indication of their privileged status. Rizq, mentioned in Qur'an 3:169, is generally understood from Muqatil onwards to be at least a partial reference to delicious celestial food reserved for the martyrs. Al-Qurtubi also understands rizq to be a reference to the special closeness that only martyrs will enjoy with God in the next world. Companion reports describing the souls of the martyrs, assuming the form of green birds or of white birds, flitting about in heaven, sampling its pleasures, and alighting upon the lotus tree closest to the divine throne, find almost ubiquitous mention in the exegetical literature. The paranetic intent of some of these reports, which catalog these various pleasures, reserved only for the slain fighter, is explicitly mentioned in the report emanating from Ibn Ishaq as recorded by Tabari and also emphasized by Ar-Razi. Regardless of the at best tenuous connection with Qur'an 3:169, all post-Tabari exegetes I surveyed routinely refer in the context of this verse to these heavenly pleasures accorded to the martyrs. Ar-Razi indicates to us that this exegesis remained contested in his time. In response to those who remained skeptical that this verse in any way refers to a distinctive status for military martyrs only, he simply asserts that this is so, although their status was lower than the prophets and the Siddiqun. Al-Qurtubi similarly emphasizes that these two verses refer to a special state of being alive for the martyrs killed in the early battles of Islam. Interestingly, he considers these martyrs to be of the same rank as prophets, scholars, callers to prayer, market inspectors, and Qur'an reciters, all occupations and acts of service which are assumed to contribute equally to the common good of the Muslim polity, and thus qualify in his view as equal striving in the path of God. The increasing attention paid to military martyrs and their legal status is reflected in Al-Qurtubi's reference to a taxonomy of martyrs that had emerged by his time, and to the special funerary practices to be observed for different categories of martyrs. Let me leave it at that, and we can pick up on some of these points in the Q&A session. Thank you.
So please feel free to approach a microphone to ask a question.
This is for Asma. Very interesting paper, and you know, the idea of reading back into an earlier period, a sort of cult of martyrdom, is very interesting. I once looked into the topic and saw that a kind of originary ethos of martyrdom was somehow defanged in the medieval period, in which people who were patient could be assigned the status of martyr by various theologians, or people who fasted could be seen as martyrs, or people who had a bad stomachache in one case could be seen as martyrs. So there may be a kind of mutual energizing of this theme. My question is this. In your study, have you encountered any discussion of martyrdom with regard to the Rashidun Khulafa, three of whom were murdered, and there are rumors that even the first one may have been prematurely led to his death, and also any other prominent figures? I mean, there are also hadith about the Prophet himself, but I'm mainly interested in the caliphs. Have you seen any?
The Khulafa Rashidun in particular?
Right. Yeah, in which this designation of martyrdom is.
Right. First of all, in reference to your first point, the hadith literature is actually quite detailed in identifying